When my daughter Jessica was 8 years old, she was very particular about her wardrobe. She only wore her older brother's hand me downs. All through third and fourth grade, polo shirts tucked into long shorts, belted. Her only concession to me was some ruffled socks. This is because she wanted to be just like Nick. She adored her older brother. Nick was beautiful. Dark curly hair, dark eyes, and a big gorgeous smile that could light up any room. And the best hugger. When he hugged you, there was no doubt you were getting all of him. You felt it. Nick was smart, outgoing, generous, funny, and had lots of friends. He was champion for the underdog and always the protector. He and I took a trip to Seattle when he was 12. As we walked around downtown Seattle among the skyscrapers, he asked me, "Mom, why don't you give any money to all these homeless people that we see here?" And so we talked about it, and I told him the next day he would get to decide. I gave him $21 bills and told him to decide who they should go to. Well, by lunchtime, all of his dollars were gone. Nick was an athlete, playing every sport growing up and starting kicker for his high school football team for 4 years. And his dad, my husband Mike, was his coach for most of his young life. Starting with baseball when he was 5 and moving on to soccer where he excelled. That is until Nick became too good for Mike to coach. Nick was quick-witted, funny with a good sense of humor. One day while we were at dinner, he thought it'd be funny to quiz me on football. Players' names, teams, positions. And I asked him, "What's a tight end?" He rolled. He thought that was so funny, incredulous that I did not know what a tight end is. Laughing, laughing, laughing. And when he was laughing, I knew he was feeling good. But then the laughing would stop. One day the phone rang. It was the police, and could we come get Nick? It was Halloween 2004. Nick and some other boys were at the neighborhood clubhouse. They were loud, boisterous, and drunk. But Nick being drunk was different than the other boys. He was defiant, belligerent, and angry. While the other boys sat meekly on the curb, Nick was arguing with the police, insisting that he wasn't drunk, and yelling at his father. The first time Nick went to rehab was the summer between his junior and senior year. We timed it so he wouldn't miss any football. And I thought, oh good, we fixed that. Let's move on. We don't have to tell anybody. And so we went back to a fall of normal life. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell my best friend. But he couldn't separate himself from the people and the places that contributed to his using. And he found himself smoking pot and drinking all the time. He asked us if he could change high schools for the last semester. What a hard idea to consider. Can you imagine leaving all the people that you'd been with for so many years, friends and classmates? In an effort to stay clean, that was his request. And so he changed to a new high school for the last semester of his senior year. As a parent, you have hopes and dreams for your children. Because Nick was such a good kicker, he and Mike's dream was that he would kick in college. And together they worked on that dream, practicing all the time, hiring kicking coaches, putting together highlight reel to send to colleges. Nick was offered a walk-on to Division I university, but he came to us again and said, "I can't go. I just can't handle that life." And then that plan for the future was gone. My way of coping, on the other hand, was to throw myself into my work. I traveled most weeks 2 to 3 nights away. When I was away, I didn't have to think about the reality of Nick's addiction, and I didn't have to talk about it. As for Jess, she and Nick both tried to make their sibling relationship a good one, but Nick was an addict and everything that goes along with that. She'd witness him doing things like asking us for gas money and knowing he would use it for drugs. She'd come to us and she would say, "What are you doing? Why do you do all this?" She resented him for the angst he was causing us, her parents. And yet again, another apology, I overheard Jess say to Nick, "All I want from you is to never have to apologize to me again." Heartbreaking. There was a lot of conflict in the house. I remember one time I told Mike and Nick, either Nick goes or I go. And I was serious. My husband was enabling Nick, and Nick was taking advantage. Ultimately, we ended up subsidizing an apartment for Nick. Sometimes you make new friends through shared experiences. Not so with addiction. It was lonely and isolating. We missed out on family trips because Nick couldn't go. We spent Christmas with just the four of us. We didn't hang out with our best, closest friends when they all got together. I have a picture of my niece's wedding in Connecticut. Everybody is there. Aunts, uncle, cousins, now deceased grandparents. Everyone except Nick. Nick should have been in that picture. I wish we'd been more open. Life is a series of challenges. What would you do if your child had a high fever in the middle of the night? I remember as a young mother, first person I called was my mother. After that, I called my sister-in-law. Then I called my best friend. And I'd seek advice from them. And they were there with me throughout the illness, and I'd have their support and their advice and their help. It's essential. It's normal, except if it's a mental health issue. I didn't call anyone. Finally, when he was 23, Nick was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. This was concrete. It made sense to us. His use of alcohol and drugs were self-medication. In a way, they tempered the manic feeling, that drive to go, 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 and always be up. But Nick just wanted a normal life. He was prescribed medications to help with the moods that come with bipolar, and he started taking them. He always questioned them. He did not want anyone outside our immediate family to know that he was bipolar or taking medication. And he asked me, why is bipolar medication okay and other drugs are not? We'd always said drugs were bad. Why was this any different just because it's prescribed? We tried to explain to him it's a process, that he had to give it time, and it was an adjustment for the brain. Eventually, he'd go off the medication, I think because he was feeling better and thought was back to normal. And then he'd spiral. He'd start drinking and using drugs again. It was a cycle that would lead him again asking for help and starting over. This often involved trying new meds. Transitioning to meds is difficult, often taking up to 3 months to be effective. 3 months was a long time for Nick. And then, as if things could not get worse, with the instability of taking the prescribed medication and the use of alcohol and street drugs and then coming off of everything, Nick started to have psychotic episodes, seeing and hearing things that were not there, paranoid that people were following him, that they wanted to hurt him. And more than one occasion, he ended up hospitalized. There were somewhere around 9 rehab stints. At least 4 of them were after his diagnosis. And still, we didn't tell anyone. One time Nick was living in a sober house in Florida, and we got a call that he was in jail. He'd stolen a car. But the truth is, when Nick was in jail or in a recovery center, we slept better. We breathed easier. At least he was safe. When you can't talk about your child honestly with the most important people in your life, it's isolating, like our own form of jail. Why didn't we share? We were ashamed. We'd done everything right. 2 loving parents, good schools, nice neighborhood, fun activities. Why was this happening to us? We thought we could fix it. Why couldn't we fix it? We were sad that it was happening to Nick. We were frustrated with his behavior, and we were angry that he didn't seem to get it. To talk about it would be to ask for sympathy, to admit we had failed in some way, and to say that our Nick was less than. But would we have said the same if he had cancer? Nick died on September 22nd of 2017 at the age of 29 in a horrible accident, and with him our hopes and dreams for him died, and our shame died. After Nick's death, Facebook was alive with speculation about him, what had happened and how. Most of it was pure gossip and false. As I was writing Nick's obituary, my smart, beautiful daughter was helping me find the words and said, "What do you want people to know, Mom? Are you going to tell the whole story?" And I said, "This is going to affect all of us. What do you want everyone to know?" As a family, we agreed that the obituary would include Nick's challenges with addiction and mental health. At his funeral service, Mike and I stood in front of a standing room only crowd. We each talked about our son, how wonderful he was, how we miss him, and how he suffered from mental health and specifically addiction and bipolar. We talked about taking trips, playing sports, and the love we had. We also talked about alcohol, drugs, and bipolar and how they ruled half of his life. And then a big surprise. At the end of the service, in a small reception room, hundreds of people filed past us. One leaned in and whispered, "I suffer from bipolar too." And then another, as she hugged us, said, "I too suffer from bipolar." And a little later, someone said, "My mother suffers from bipolar." And another mentioned her brother. There were 8 in all. Some were public, most were not. But all of them thanked us for being truthful and speaking up and telling Nick's real story. And now, I still hear him bounding through the back door with a loud cry of "Mom!" ringing throughout the house. So I don't shut up about Nick. Everybody knows the real story, and I keep telling it. And the relief is tremendous and has been healing for us all. I could not love him more. I miss him every day, and I show by sharing his story. He was the champion of the underdog, and my job is to carry out his legacy.